Hello everyone, my name is Zimakai, and today I will be presenting about covert operation, means or ends that I co-author with Dr. Mergutesik. So this presentation is about covert operation. In simple terms, covert operation is an unconventional approach that is embedded in a layer of secrecy and ambiguities. It has been expanding since the creation of the CIA in the 20th century, and but it was not until the end of Cold War that this operation has become used as a foreign policy instrument, both to achieve both at home and abroad. With the ever-changing complex threat environment, covert operations are now more than just traditional intelligence gathering, but are now more difficult to pinpoint in time and space without any written or digital evidence confirming their existence. Therefore, there is a growing consensus today that covert operations are becoming less covert and more overt than its traditionally perceived anonymous nature. This leads us to our research question. With the changing nature of political climate since the end of Cold War, are covert operations still covert? If so, should covert operations be means or ends? This research aims to redefine covert operation and assess the different aspects of covert operation and how this changing nature of covert operation that it is turning more overt has a changing implication on democracy and how it affects how future war would look like. The research then argued, even when covert operations are of open, secrets, and overt, there is no significant decline in the threat posed to democracy. Therefore, covertness should not deviate from its traditional purpose as a means of achieving goals and become an end in itself. So, what is covert operation? The earliest definition has been offered by the National Security Act in 1947, and shortly after, President Truman has refined this definition. What these two definitions telling us is that U.S. government can conduct a covert operation on target state to influence all sectors of this particular state, whether it's economic, military, political, social, or environment, if you like, and but any attempt on domestic environment should be prohibited. In other words, activities can be conducted to achieve a national or political objective, but any attempt on the domestic environment, which will include political processes such as elections, public opinions, will be highly prohibited. The most recent one has bring in a very important, which has bring in a very important aspects of uh, covert operation, which is possible deniability. It defined covert operation as an act that is so planned and executed to permit the possible denial by the sponsor. Possible deniability is the very element that distinguish covert operation from overt operation. But what this definition theoretically means is about withholding information by the senior official to prevent repercussion in an event that these activities become known to the public. And this deniability has to be achieved at two levels, both at state level, which means senior officials should be able to deny it, and at international level, that is, the state should be able to deny it. But what this definition fails to account is that covert operations are now making an overt turn, and it has been operating in increased transparency and decreased secrecy. So this has led to the emergence of the concept of impossible deniability. Uh, yes, their involvement has been able to deny, but the very element of possibility is under question. There are different level of exposure, different degrees of exposure happening at different level of government, either because of the increase of advance in media technology, or the multidimensional nature. And recently, there has also been a rise in the private military companies and special forces, which has created this what we call the gray zone of operation, in which covert operation is a part of. So what does this implications has on the democracy? Covert operation has been traditionally and now used because it has been a way to protect the violation of liberal values and to democratic values. But then what we witness today is U.S. government has been supporting the pro-Western autocrats and protecting its own national interests while undermining democracy. And this will be made clearer later in this presentation. So this research, three case study has been chosen. First, the Operation Adjust, which is the assassination of replacement of uh, Prime Minister Mossadegh in Iran, and Project Blue Blood, which is the removal of President Alade in Chile, and Operation Kayamula, which is the assassination of the ISIS leader in northern Syria. The first two cases were chosen for comparison purpose, while the last one being the main case study that provide the basis for the analysis. The first two cases take place in the Cold War period, while the Operation Just being the first and the Project Blue Blood being the last during that period, and the Operation Kayamula take place in the post-Cold War period. And this period is important, and which we will see in the next slides. Covert operation, the fault lines of covert operation emanates from its definition. And the definition has been broken down into two parts. The first part, which is to conceal the identity and allow possible denial by the sponsor. What this emanates is the plausible deniability, the very element of covert operation. But what does plausible deniability by the sponsor mean? Who is the sponsor? And as mentioned earlier, the deniability should be achieved at both level, at state level or international level. But what this seems to be telling is it seems to be protecting the sponsor while not about denying the involvement of the state itself. So this possible deniability is under question. And another second is the will not be apparent or acknowledged publicly, but acknowledged publicly by whom. So the two very more two elements of covert operation can be refined into the first element being deniability, well, not including possible, it's just deniability, and the other one being apparent or acknowledged, either not apparent or not acknowledged. If we look at the case study in Operation Ajax and Project Blue Blood versus the Operation Kayamula, we see a transition from a Cold War period to post-Cold War period. But what we also witnessed is a transformation from a covert operation to a overt covert operation. In all three cases, there is a clear ambition to remove the target, whether it's the Prime Minister Mossadegh in Iran through Operation Ajax, or the removal of Alade in Chile through Project Blue Blood, or even the assassination of the ISIS leader through Operation Kayamula. But what is different is that in the first two cases, we see the involvement of the CIA was clearly apparent, and there was an obvious involvement of the CIA. But although the intention and the outcome were highly visible, there was a public denial. It was not acknowledged, and there was a denying. So it was that because there was no acknowledgement about the involvement of the state itself, they were able to deny it. But what we see in the post-Cold War period in Operation Kayamula is that there was a public announcement of how Baghdadi died, was killed himself in suicide fast with his children. So it can even be argued that this operation was not even intended to deny. From the initial intelligence gathering to the operation itself, it took place in much public awareness. Although vague, later press releases did confirm how the operation, the whole process took place. So we see the disappearance of this covertness in the operation. The changing nature of covert operation has now become more overt than it traditionally is. So how does this affect democracy? And democracy can mean anything, but in this context, it means firstly, right to be free from arbitrary power. But if the state is to protect its national interest or fulfill its international responsibility, even if covert operation is a dirty politics, it seems to the public that it's valid. is a valid option. But the mere involvement of the CIA and the US government means that it's still about meddling into the target state internal affair without its consent. Whether it's making an overturn or not, the mere involvement erodes the very principle of sovereignty and non-intervention that the target state has. Second is the practice of non-violent resolution. There were no high intensive conduct or massive casualties. So if you view this operation through an outcome, it's not that undemocratic. But it still constitutes a violation of human and civil rights by the rebel forces. So it's still a threat to democracy even at this point. But what's different is allow transparency. After all, many institutions operate under public awareness. Court, for example, if everyone has to take place in every level of decision making by the government, obviously the government is not going to function very well. So there is still a room for secrecy. And democracy should be about maximizing transparency, but the covert operation itself is a violation of such. So there is still no decreasing effect it has on democracy. It is still a threat to the democracy. So what future war would look like with this transformation? It will not only be within security dimension, but it will also be about economic, political, societal, or even environment most recently. And the future war would be more undeclared and hybrid in nature. It could be a complete departure from traditional standard warfare, which will combine traditional and non-traditional, conventional and non-conventional approaches. And the war could be expected to break out of nowhere. It could happen at any place at any time, and the state will be expected to remain defensive and vigilant. And perhaps this overturn in the covert operation is the indication of such vigilance, a power projection of the secret capabilities. So should it be a means or ends? Covert operation has been used as a middle option between doing nothing and an offensive military confrontation, which will include nuclear weapons, but the consequences will be more unpredictable than it is before. And ends are often linked to the effectiveness of covert operation, which is determined by its outcome. In all three cases, we see the end is presented as a power projection of the US over the target state, but covert operations do not end with the realization that these primary objectives have been achieved. So states have gone from using covertness as to prevent significant blowback, but their accomplishment has caused more problems. Because there is a lack of defined objective, a covert operation has not become a mean, but an end in itself. Primarily targeting public opinion through media, for example. If we look at the cases, in the case of Iran and Chile, for example, in Iran, there was a nationalization of oil industry, and in Chile, there was a election of a leftist, ambitious government, but both governments were democratically elected, and the democratic nature under which they operate is clear that they're not a communist country, even if they're not a fully fledged democracy. But what the US did through Operation Adjust and Project Full Blood is to overthrow such democratically elected government with a brutal dictator. In Iran, it has led to 25 years of tyranny that has led to a brutal wars and instability in the country that the US has no control over. Even with the case of ISIS, yes, it did weaken the power of ISIS significantly, not just in the region, but also internationally. But it is a war of attribution. It is not going to end just with the death of ISIS leader. ISIS still exists at some point. So because there was a lack of objectives and nothing was really achieved after the operation has taken place, it has become an end in itself and not a mean to achieve the certain objectives. So it is clear that even with this, there's a transformation in the covert operation that it has now become more overt, but it's still a threat to democracy. And without clear objective, it has become an end in itself, although it should only be used as a mean. So this research has explored all aspects of the definitions of covert operations and reassessed its implication on democracy, and how this relationship has been used to address the issue of whether it should become a means or ends. But this research still opened a ground for the need to reconceptualize covert operation. Um, this research has addressed the overturn, covertness, and threat to democracy, for example, and these related issues has to be taken into account in the future definition of covert operation. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.